What is up, everyone? James Lynch here. Thank you so much for watching. This is Early Look. If you haven't watched the show before, basically I preview an upcoming notable fight. And on today's show, I'm going to be previewing the UFC 274 lightweight fight between Michael Chandler and Tony Ferguson. But before we dig into the stats and give you my preview and pick, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I post content on here every single day, and it really helps out the channel if you can do those two quick things, and also hit that notification bell. So like I mentioned there, UFC 274 is a pretty stacked card. I will have a preview for Oliveira and Gaethje coming out here soon, but I figured first we'd start with the lightweight fight between Michael Chandler and Tony Ferguson. So I'm going to go through all the stats. I'm going to go through a bunch of different things between these two fighters, and then I'm going to give you my pick at the very end of this. And if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them on the video after I'm done this breakdown. All right, we're going to start first with the fact that this fight is, like I said, taking place May 7th, Phoenix, Arizona. It's only going to be a 3-round fight, and that's an interesting thing, a little tidbit here, because obviously both of these guys have fought for titles. In the case of Ferguson, he won an interim title, so it'll be interesting to see how the 3 rounds compares to 5. I wish this was 5 rounds, but what are you going to do? We've got a main event that's going to be 5 rounds as well. Okay, we're going to start first with Michael Chandler. Whoops, let's start right here. So Michael Chandler, 22-7 record, 10 knockouts, 7 submission victories, and 5 decisions. Chandler is 35 years old. He's going to be turning 36 on April 24th. So by the time this fight comes around, he will be 36. Chandler's 5'8" with a 71-inch reach, and he's 2 years younger than Tony Ferguson. So that's the one advantage he has in this matchup. Chandler's currently ranked number 5 in the lightweight rankings at the time of recording this. He's a 3-time Bellator lightweight champion. He's a former NCAA Division I wrestler, and he splits time between Nashville MMA, the gym that he owns, and Sanford MMA. And Sanford, as you guys know, one of the best gyms in the world. One thing you might have not realized is that Chandler actually started his career as a welterweight. He had the one fight there, and then he had a couple of catchweight fights as well at 165, but the majority of his career has been at lightweight. Now, of course, Chandler cut his teeth in Bellator. He won their first lightweight tournament, and then ended up fighting Eddie Alvarez for the title, and that's kind of why and how he became this sort of household name in the scene. Also, got to point out, Chandler did not have a amateur career. Some fighters don't. He made his MMA debut, as you can see here, in August of 2009. He didn't make his UFC debut until January of 2021. So that was against Dan Hooker. We know how that fight went. He's 1-2 in the UFC. He's got 1 stoppage victory, the one over Dan Hooker. Some of his notable wins include Dan Hooker, Eddie Alvarez, when he got in Bellator. Benson Henderson's notable only because he's a former UFC lightweight champion, but I wouldn't really count that as a notable win, considering the fact that Henderson has gone over to Bellator. He's a bit older, taken a lot of injuries. He's not the same Benson Henderson that was the lightweight champion in the UFC, but got to mention him anyways. His notable losses include Justin Gaethje, which was in his last fight back at UFC 268 in November, and then of course Charles Oliveira, losing the title to him in a very close fight. I mean, that was a fight where Chandler was throwing the kitchen sink at Oliveira. It looked like he was going to finish him, didn't end up happening. Oliveira gets the win in the second round in that one. He also has a notable loss to Patricio Pitbull, the former Bellator featherweight champion. He was finished in 1 minute and 1 second in that fight. It was back at Bellator 221 not that long ago. That was May of 2019 that he lost that fight. And then he also lost to Brent Primus. That was more of an injury, but wouldn't really count that as a notable loss. He does have 2 losses to Will Brooks. We'll talk about one of them a little bit later here, but 2 losses to Will Brooks. The second loss, clearly he lost. He did one of these in the fight. It was really weird, actually. Go back and watch that fight if you haven't. Bellator 131. Lost that decisively, and then lost a split decision to Eddie Alvarez in their rematch as well. So those are some of the notable losses that he's had in his career. One of the interesting things about Chandler, if you look here on his Tapology page here, not a lot of injuries in terms of missing fights. He actually really hasn't withdrawn from any fights at all. It's mostly been his opponents. If you look at here, Josh Thompson, Brent Primus. He did obviously hurt his knee, or his ankle, I should say, in the Bellator NYC fight against Brent Primus. You can see their ankle injury. That kept him out of action for a little bit, but that's really the only injury he's had in his career. He's been pretty lucky that way. Mentioned close fights. Let's talk first about the Will Brooks fight. This one back at Bellator. Actually, no, we'll start first with the Eddie Alvarez fight that Alvarez ended up winning at Bellator 106. I went back and looked at that fight. If you go to MMA Decisions, you can get the media scorecards for that one. It turns out that 3 media members scored the fight for Alvarez, 10 scored it for Chandler. So a lot of people felt like Chandler should have won that fight. So even though it's a loss in his resume, maybe it shouldn't look like that in hindsight. The other loss that he had here was against Will Brooks, the first fight that they had. Again, I went back and looked. That was at Bellator 120 back in May of 2014. Only 1 media member scored the fight for Brooks, 7 scored it a draw, and 5 scored it for Michael Chandler. So you can see there the majority of people felt it should have either been a draw or Michael Chandler's win. So again, his record could look a little bit better if you go back and look at some of those close fights. Okay, so that's Michael Chandler. We know obviously started as a wrestler. I mentioned the NCAA Division I wrestling, but his hands have really come a long way. A lot of knockout wins, a lot of impressive victories, and highlight reel finishes in his career too. He's become a really well-rounded fighter at 35 years of age. Tony Ferguson, let's talk about him. One of the fan favorites in the UFC, El Cucuy. 12 knockouts, 8 submissions, 5 decisions in his career. He's got an overall record of 25-6, as you can see there. He's 38 years old, just turned 38 back in February. He's 5'11" with a 76-inch reach, which is interesting because he's going to have a 3-inch height advantage and 3.5-inch reach advantage. Hope my math's good on this one. I know the last video I did, I messed up something, but I think that's correct. Either way, he will be the bigger fighter in this matchup. Like Chandler, Ferguson has also fought at welterweight, but the majority of his career has been at lightweight. Currently, he is ranked number 7 in the lightweight rankings. He also won the Ultimate Fighter Season 13, if you guys remember, way back in the day. He was also a UFC interim lightweight champion in 2017. I feel like a lot of people forget about that. That was an interim title fight, right? He was supposed to fight Habib, and then that just never materialized. He was supposed to fight Habib a couple times, didn't end up happening, but he got the third round submission victory over Kevin Lee. That was back in October of 2017. So Ferguson is a former interim champion. Can't look past that on his resume. He's a BJJ black belt, and I went and looked up where he's training. We know he trains in California. Tapology has Knuckleheads Boxing is where he's been training. We know that he's also been working with Eddie Bravo. And then it's also listed on Sherdog that he trains at Team Death Clutch. So I'm not sure exactly where Ferguson's training. He's got kind of an unorthodox training style and all that. So yeah, just we know that he's training in California. That's kind of the main thing there. Just like Michael Chandler, Tony Ferguson did not have an amateur career. As you can see there, no amateur fights. Made his MMA debut in April of 2008. Made his UFC debut in June of 2011. So way more UFC experience than Michael Chandler, although Chandler opted to sign with Bellator as opposed to maybe going to the UFC, although I don't know if they would have signed him back then. If you look at some of his notable wins in Ferguson's career, Josh Thompson, that was a good win at the time. If you remember when Thompson came back to the UFC, he was really tearing it up. Edson Barbosa was a good win. Submission victory over Barbosa, extremely tough to do against Edson. And then also had a really good win over Rafael dos Anjos, the former lightweight champion. That was a good win too. So really notable victory there. Kevin Lee was a good win at the time. I know a lot of people don't like Kevin Lee and all that, but at the time that was a good win. And I know he did struggle in that first round, but Ferguson came back and got the finish. And then these other 2 wins, they're notable names. I don't know if they're necessarily notable wins now, sort of looking back. Pettis, I think we can all agree, hasn't really been the same caliber of fighter that we've seen in the past when he was lightweight champion. But still, former champion always looks good on the resume. And then he obviously beat Cerrone as well. And, again, Cerrone's not someone who's been winning a lot of fights, but still notable in terms of fan recognition and everything else. Some of the key losses that Ferguson has been recently, right? Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush. You have to go all the way back to a fight against Michael Johnson back in 2012, the last time Ferguson lost. Prior to that, I think if he had rematched Johnson, and they actually were slated to rematch, I think back in 2016, I think Ferguson probably would have won that fight. Michael Johnson's one of those weird guys in the division. He has a win over Dustin Poirier as well. It's just one of those fights that, it happens every now and then. You get one of those weird losses on your resume. But I think if Ferguson had rematched Johnson a few years later, he probably would have won that fight. Nothing against Michael Johnson, but I just think that Ferguson, probably would have beat him there. One of the key things in this fight that I think is common knowledge, but I got to point it out anyways, is the layoff coming into this fight. So you'll see he fought Dariush back in May 15th, 2021. So when he fights Michael Chandler, it'll be 358 days since his last fight. That's a really long layoff, especially for a guy who's 38 years old, dealing with injuries throughout his career. And I'll mention some of those injuries. Hasn't been a ton, but I went back and looked. There's 2 key injuries that he had. If you remember back in April of 2016, he was supposed to fight Habib Nurmagomedov. Where is it here? I mean, he was supposed to fight Habib a couple times. Habib ended up pulling out a few times there, but you see here, Nurmagomedov pulled out of that one, but then it was this fight where Ferguson got an injury back in April of 2016. Went back and looked, didn't really know exactly what the injury was, but yeah, he was out due to that one. And then, of course, UFC 223. I mean, we were actually coming up on the anniversary of that fight being pulled out. The story, Tony Ferguson was supposed to do a TV hit, tripped over a cord and tore his knee. Just terrible luck. Of course, that led to what was supposed to be Habib and Max Holloway to Habib and Al Iaquinta. So really weird circumstances what happened there. Let's take a look at the odds right now. You can see here, most books have Chandler about a 3-1 favorite in this fight, and Tony Ferguson a big underdog going into this one. I love Tony Ferguson. I would love nothing more than Tony Ferguson to go out there and look like the old Tony Ferguson in this fight to get it done. I just don't think it happens. I think Tony Ferguson, what we're seeing is a decline here. Now, look, I'm not, oblivious to the fact that he's fighting the best guys in the division. Gaethje, I mean, he's fighting for the title on this card. Oliveira is the current champ. You got Beneil Dariush, who, supposed to fight Islam, but I mean, that was a good test for him as well. I think Dariush is definitely top 5. So we're kind of in one of those situations, kind of like we were with Dan Hooker a few months ago, where, is Tony Ferguson declining, or is it the fact that he's, fighting really good opposition? I think it's a bit of both, but I think you got to look at the fact that he's had, the layoff, the age, at 38. I mean, this isn't the heavyweight division. You see a lot of guys start to slow down when they get closer to their 40s in the case of Ferguson. And just, some of the injuries he's had to deal with as well can't be good either. I think if you look at the two fighters, Ferguson has had more injuries than Chandler had. Actually, there isn't a huge age difference, right? I mentioned that they're just 2 years age gap there because, like I said, Chandler's going to be 36 later this year. Ferguson's 38. So just 2 years. Did I say 3 years earlier in this video? I think I did. Darn it. I was hoping. Oh yeah, no, I did say 2 years younger. Okay. Glad I covered that. But yeah, you get the point here. They're pretty similar in age, but if you look at actual damage accumulated, it's tough because, Chandler's taken some damage in some of those wars he's had with Alvarez and, even in the Gaethje fight in his last one. So it's tough to say who's taken more damage. Ferguson, I would say, has been a little bit more injured, and Ferguson's a little bit older too. The difference between Chandler and Ferguson, at least recently, is that Ferguson hasn't looked like he's been in any of these fights, right? Like Gaethje, I mean, I guess the Gaethje fight was a little bit closer, but Gaethje sort of took over. Oliveira, he wasn't in that fight at all. And same thing with Dariush. And I don't mean to say that disrespectfully. I really like Tony Ferguson. He's definitely a fan favorite, but I just think that they weren't competitive fights, right? Like you could see partway through that fight, you knew what was going to happen. Oliveira and Dariush were on their way to winning that fight. And in the case of Gaethje finishing Ferguson, extremely impressive. It was a 5th round finish though, as well. If you look at Chandler, again, his losses, Hooker, I know, maybe not the greatest win looking back now, considering what Hooker's done since then. But I mean, like I said, he was close to finishing Oliveira in that fight. And then he lost to Gaethje. I know Gaethje clearly won the fight. I don't think there's any debate in the scorecards. But the fact that he didn't get knocked out, some people have said, Chandler has a bad chin because Patricio Pitbull knocked him out, whatever. I don't know about that. So I know I'm kind of relying on MMA math a little bit here, but I think you can take away a lot from Chandler's performances. I know it's only 3 UFC fights, and Ferguson has fought the more UFC, matchups in his career. But to me, it just speaks volumes to the fact that I think Chandler's performing at a higher level right now, and I think Chandler's still sort of in his prime. I'm more of the belief that I think Ferguson is on the decline. Like I said, I hope that's not the case. I hope we see a new Ferguson. I hope we see a Ferguson that comes out and really impresses here. But my pick for this fight has got to be Michael Chandler. Now, look, am I going to lay the 3-1 odds on Michael Chandler in this fight? I'm not. I think the safer bet here is taking Chandler by decision. You look at Ferguson typically in his career, he doesn't get finished. Even, the Gaethje fight was a 5th round finish in that one. I know Chandler's, he throws, I think, as much power, close to the amount of power that Gaethje does. But still, even looking at that, Gaethje, it took him to the 5th round to get that finish here. You look at it throughout his career, he's just not a guy that gets finished that often. So I think that's the best bet if you're looking to bet this fight. It's only a 3-round fight. I think Chandler likely pushes the pace and gets it done. I think if it stays standing, I think Chandler's got, the advantage in terms of the power and the striking. He's also got the wrestling too. I think he's a better wrestler than Ferguson, at least based off the credentials, being a former NCAA Division I wrestler. I think Ferguson has the edge on the ground. I mean, Ferguson's got a great ground game. I mentioned the credentials there, 8 submission victories. That's nothing to sort of look past here. But Chandler is a guy as well that, has never been submitted, at least not to my knowledge. He's only been finished. And Ferguson just isn't the type of power puncher to go out there and knock out a Michael Chandler in this fight. So again, my pick in this fight is going to be Michael Chandler by decision to get it done at UFC 274 on May 7th. So that's going to be my pick. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking? Who do you think gets it done? Do you agree with me that Ferguson's on the decline? Do you think it's just the fact that he's fighting hard opposition, difficult opposition? Or do you think, Chandler's overrated? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts here because I have a sort of a view on this fight, like I just mentioned. Curious to hear what you guys think. Again, it's, we're about a month away from the matchup here at the time of recording this, but my pick is going to be Michael Chandler by decision. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell as well. Also got the Patreon too. If you guys want some extra content, you want to message me anytime. We got a really cool community on the Discord as well that comes with the Patreon membership. So just keep that in mind as well if you dig the content. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.